that I introduce Rabbi Rabin to you. I first met Rabbi Rabin back in Doncaster days. His great work in reaching out to all the Jews in the area really impressed me. Can you imagine my delight when Rabbi took the post at South Caulfield Hebrew congregation? My parents were foundation members, and I knew he was the right man to rejuvenate the community. During COVID, he has been dynamic, non-stop on Facebook, Zoom, Instagram, you name it, he's been on it. COVID is one of the once in a lifetime event, we hope. But Rabbi has been uplifting. His attitude has shined through. But now I'd like to welcome Rabbi, and you tell it from your perspective of how it's really been for you.
Oh, thank you very much, Rita, and thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all, and a big honor to be presenting tonight. And it's interesting, you know, because as you said, over the last number of months, I've been sort of asking and been questioning people as opposed to being the guest. Now I'm the guest of tonight's event, so it's a nice privilege, and it's wonderful to see so many names, at least, because I can't see all the faces because I'm spotlighted at the moment. But a lot of names that I know, and of course to Peter Morris, who's part of our show as well. It's wonderful to see Peter, and to the president of this unit, and also some people from the previous unit. I was the rabbi in Doncaster beforehand, and I was made an honorary member of the Atikva unit I think it was the Atikva unit. I hope I haven't forgotten the name.
Yes.
In Doncaster, and I attended a number of B'nai B'rith meetings, and also had the privilege of talking and presenting there as well. So it's nice to be back with your organization, and certainly, as I said, a big honor, big zchut. So thank you for, as I said, inviting me to talk about this topic. I understand that this topic we all might be a little bit fatigued hearing about, you know, COVID and dealing with COVID. And that's probably one of the signs that it has been a very strenuous and challenging 6 months or so already that we've all been experiencing. And so I hope that this doesn't add to your fatigue or add to your tiredness about thinking about COVID. But what I thought I would do tonight, and I'm not sure, can you just remind me how long I have until we want to go to questions?
You could go for 20-25 minutes and then have another 20-25 minutes for questions.
Okay, fantastic. Well, again, I'm not here to talk so long, and questions are often the best way to sort of engage and give people an opportunity. And thank you for being willing to facilitate the questions. But I thought I'd go through, I guess, 3 aspects tonight, and hopefully that will give you some perspective, some ideas as to, I guess, how I've seen it through my lens. And that is sort of look what has actually happened practically from the moment that we went into lockdown, what I've sort of done as a response to that, and then look at some real strategies that I'll have to admit that I may not have necessarily implemented all these strategies perfectly, or perhaps didn't necessarily do all of them. But these are strategies that I've come up with through readings and through different parts of my own experience. I've done a lot of work as a psychotherapist. I've got a master's in psychotherapy. And of course, what we've all gone through over the last number of months is loss. You know, unfortunately, loss is a very big word, and it can incorporate so many things. You know, we know the traditional sense of loss is losing a loved one. And some people have lost loved ones through this time. But we've all lost parts of ourselves. We've all lost parts of freedoms that we've enjoyed. Some may have lost jobs. Some may have lost contact with loved ones. Some may have lost just the sense of being able to do things they enjoy. So we've all experienced loss. And of course, as we know, when we lose something, we have to go through some type of grieving process. And again, all of us have had different experiences through this time, some with more serious loss, some with less serious loss. And of course, the most important thing I'd like to first stress at the onset is that it doesn't matter what you've lost, or it doesn't matter at what degree you've lost. Each of us are unique individuals. And I think making a judgment on anybody is probably the wrong attitude. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen so much judgment that has occurred over the last number of months. People sort of saying, how can you do this? How can you react like that? And almost, I think, probably the fundamental thing we should all remember is that each of us has experienced it differently, not right or wrongly. You know, you cannot say how I've experienced is the right way or how you've experienced is the wrong way. We're all unique individuals. And I hope this time has taught us that each of us do, in fact, experience it in a different way. But I'd just like to give you sort of a trip down the last number of months and how it's gone and how we've reacted I've reacted individually as a rabbi in my community, with my family. And I'll take you back to Purim this year. I remember, obviously, of course, we were all hearing sorts of news reports of this virus that had been spreading. And of course, even before that, if we go before Purim, I have a family that I'm close to that they were members of my congregation in Doncaster, who happened to be on the Princess ship, you know, the one that had, that had to be isolated and kept on the boat for 14 days. And I was in constant contact with them. You know, they were doing video streaming and telling us about this COVID-19, this coronavirus. And I have to admit, at that point, I don't think any of us, we were watching it on the TV, but it seemed so far away. It seemed so distant. It seemed like this thing is not going to be relevant to any of us. It seemed like, as I said, it was for somebody else. It was a problem for something else. And, if you had a magic ball at the time and you could sort of predict what we were going to go through, what the world was going to go through, I think we would all be pretty shocked to understand what we were going to experience. But I remember talking to them, and then it started to become more real. And it was Purim. And we had planned a beautiful event here at South Caulfield Shul, a really big, family function with hundreds of attendees. And I remember talking to some of the young families. We were sort of standing around, and we were outside on our outdoor area over here. And I remember saying to them, and we were all talking, we said, Purim has just made the cut. I can't imagine that past this time, we're going to be able to meet like this. And in our minds, the discussion, which was interesting, was that it was going to be maybe for a few weeks, we're going to get locked down for 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, and then we could go back to our lives. But we all were expecting something was coming, something was going to be announced. And in fact, I remember that week, the announcements came that we were going into our first lockdown. And I don't know how you felt. I don't know if you can recall back then. It feels like such a long time ago, and that we've experienced so much since then, that we had this announcement. And I remember calling we have a chazan at our shul, Chazan Greg Hurwitz, who's a good friend of mine besides for working with me. And I called him and I said, look, we've been ordered. And at the time we hadn't yet been ordered that shuls had to be closed, but it was coming. And I remember the Rabbinical Council of Victoria, which I sit on the executive over there, we were talking, and there was lots of discussions amongst various shuls and rabbis as to, are we going to close shuls down? Before the government made it mandatory that we had to shut the shuls down and shut the places of worship, there was this general sense of that it was dangerous, it wasn't safe. And of course, with a lot of the shuls having some vulnerable members of the community, we wanted to be extra careful. So a number of shuls made a decision to close before it was in fact mandatory for all of us to close. And I remember the final morning of our minyan here. We have a daily minyan in the morning and evening, and of course on Shabbat. And I can't recall the day, maybe it was a Tuesday morning. I remember coming to shul at 6:30 in the morning or 6:45. And I recall making the announcement to our community. Of course, I discussed it with our board of management, and we had all come to that decision that the safest thing at this point was to, cease having minyanim. And I remember making the announcement saying to members that this will be the final minyan. And then I sent an email to the community that the shul is now going to be temporarily closed. And I remember seeing one member burst into tears. And he was shocked at the announcement. Now, of course, coming from a background, I don't want to, go into too much detail because someone might know him. But, obviously being through an experience where, unfortunately, maybe shuls had to be shut for various different reasons in his history or perhaps through his parents' history, it felt like his world had caved in. How could we be forced to close shuls? This feels like totally against anything that we could ever have imagined. And I reassured him, I said, look, it's for the safety of our people, our population. There's something called pikuach nefesh. There's something called the preservation of life. And we know that Judaism holds life as the ideal, as the utmost importance. And everything gets pushed aside except for 3 cardinal sins, which we're not going to get into tonight. But, pikuach nefesh, it overrides Shabbat, it overrides kashrut, everything. And so I said, don't feel sad. Don't feel like you're not serving Hashem. This is the most beautiful way to serve God, is to protect life and to protect those vulnerable. And it did calm me down somewhat, but it made me realize at that very moment, there was almost like an awakening, very early on. There's something massive is going to happen to our community. And I had to be charged as a leader in the community, of my community, as a spiritual leader. I needed to make a decision right then and there that I have to respond in a way. And then I'm going to have a very important task of lifting up the spirits. And I didn't yet, I guess, properly fathom the extent of that role was going to need to be. But it really was, as I said, I think the awakening or the opening, scene, if you like, where I realized it was now time to respond. It was now time to react. And that's when I called the Chazan and I said to him, look, we're going to be closed this coming Friday night and Shabbat. And as an Orthodox shul, obviously we can't stream our services on Shabbat. And I said, we've got to do something. And Zoom wasn't yet so popular as it is today. We're all so familiar with Zoom that I quickly, Googled Zoom and was looking at the different options when it came to Zoom. And I saw there was a $20 monthly account. I called our treasurer and I said, look, can we please pay for the Zoom? And we paid for this very basic Zoom account. And we sent out an email to our community saying this Friday, before Shabbat comes in, we're going to stream a Kabbalat Shabbat. Now, maybe I can be corrected, but I'm pretty confident we were the first shul to do this pre-Zoom, this pre-Kabbalat Shabbat on Zoom. And then the following weeks, a lot of shuls started doing it. Of course, now it's standard. Of course, shuls have to do that. But I remember that first Friday night, before Shabbat came in, we set up the computer. And at that point, we didn't yet, as I said, have the whole setup correct. And the sound wasn't perfect. And people came on. And I remember us singing and really not having any idea as to how long this was going to last, which none of us did. But it made me realize afterwards, after Shabbat, I received a number of messages. And this is where it's very important. I received a number of messages where people were saying, wow, that was so amazing. Thank you so much. Hope you can do this next week again. And we haven't stopped since. I mean, if you go back since, I think it was mid-February, every single Shabbat and before every Chag, we've literally streamed before Shabbos and after Shabbos. And of course, all the other things which I'll tell you, which we've done. But that has been almost, I guess, a mainstay for our community. And it made me realize that even if people, are not necessarily coming to shul every Shabbos or perhaps are not necessarily observant in that sense, I think for them having that weekly connection, that weekly tap-in point where there's this consistency of a service, and we obviously had the luxury of being able to stream it in the shul itself. I didn't have to stream it at home. I live very close to my shul. And people being able to see and be in the shul gave them a real sense of connection, a real sense of, okay, we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And even if you were going through something really challenging, and as I said, each of us experienced it in our own different way, some of us more severely than others, but no matter what level you were at, I think, that weekly connection point was very, very important. It was also at that point where I recognized that events as we had ever known them before were not going to be able to continue to exist in the way that we'd known them. Obviously, coming to the shul behind me is the shul hall, and every time we put out a table and you got coffee and tea and you got all sorts of things and you set up the chairs, and that was going to become a distant memory for some time. And so we started to think about how can we bring events to your homes as opposed to bringing you to our home, to our shul. How can we bring that to your home itself? And of course, that brought forth so many different ideas in terms of speakers, events, activities, such a range of speakers. And I think the beauty of it was that, usually we think of speakers and we try to think locally, who can we get? The Zoom world opened up the world, literally. It opened up being able to recruit people and find people from so many walks of life, so many places that we can talk to and learn from. And I have to say, I was going through actually this morning when I knew I was giving this talk, I was just looking at my YouTube channel, which almost has a recording of all the talks. And I was just going through all the talks I've given or listened to at least and hosted. And it's amazing to see so many, or to recognize so many different people who've shared their stories with us, from people who, converted to people who had gone through losses, people who had exciting jobs, pilots, paramedics, police officers, you name it. Just so many stories, so many things we can learn from. I also had in the first lockdown, and this is something just, I think some of you may have seen some of these things, but I also one day just got to be in my bonnet thinking, people are feeling down, people are feeling lost. As I said, we all went through a loss, and sometimes you need a lift. Sometimes you need something funny. Besides for the talks, besides for the education, besides for the services, I started making, and it lasted for about a month. I started every day or every couple of days thinking of doing some funny video, whether I was imitating the premier in a press conference or pretending to give a sermon to teddy bears. I don't know where my mind was at the time. Perhaps I needed help. But I recognized that it was so important to create laughter. And it really, I think really inspired so many people, and the messages we were receiving at the time. And, I remember when the COVID Safe app came around, I made a funny spoof about that. I made a funny video about setting up, in the Zoom generation compared to the other generation of, so I made sort of, you have to set up tables and you have to put out chairs. And when it came to a Zoom event, You literally put your jacket on 10 seconds before, open your computer, and you're ready to go. And after the event, you put your jacket off and you close your computer. And so I think there's going to be so much of that that will remain with us even after, please God, we get through this pandemic. And so there was this whole range of things that were occurring through the last number of months and have continued to occur. I think I felt it was so crucial for people. I think one of the key points of this whole thing that I've been saying till now was that connection. When you feel connected, when you feel there's something, it can get you through almost anything. The minute you feel isolated, the minute you feel you're not part of something, I think it exacerbates the isolation, the loneliness, the challenges. And so my goal was to give our community, and by extension, because of Zoom and because of the online world, it wasn't only South Caulfield Shul members, it was anybody who came across it, to be able to experience and feel connected. And we actually got so many people who were not part of any shul, to be honest. I even had people, I had some people from other countries writing to me, Rabbi, we're your international congregants. We come to your pre-Shabbos sing-alongs, we come to your post-Shabbos sing-alongs, we join you for your talks. And it was wonderful to really, sort of get a bigger extension of people around, of the world around you. And of course, people from Sydney or Perth and other places in Australia were connecting to our events. And this has been ongoing. As I said, I think it hasn't ended yet. We haven't been able to slow down just yet. And a lot of people saying to me, aren't you feeling burnt out? Aren't you tired? How can you handle? Aren't you zoomed out? And I'll be honest, of course, I'm also a human being just like all of you. And we all go through our personal challenges. And of course, balancing my own mental health, balancing my own family life has not always been easy. Of course, you need to find inspiration. But as I'll go through what I thought I would do next, as I said, is break this into 3 parts. I wanted to look at some ways that I've focused on looking after my own mental health. And we hear it all the time, mental health of people has been really seriously challenged, where you can't go to work, for young families who have young children at home, like, when there was a period of time where you couldn't send your children to childcare or to school, our children experiencing being at home. I know for me, it's been interesting to watch. I have 3 kids, Canon and Hora. Two of them are sort of 12 and 13, and one younger in the 5-year-old mark. But to watch them experiencing COVID has also been an eye-opening experience. There's been parts of it which they've really enjoyed, sitting around in your pajamas all day and not having to go to school, being on the computer. But at the same time, missing out on all the connection with your friends. But they're so connected with the technology that they're talking to their friends all day on technology, of course. But for the 5-year-old in particular, our little Ellie, he was one of my co-hosts for so many events. We did the daily shofar blowing in Elul together, and we did a lot of talks together. So he was very much part of connecting with people. He struggled at times when we had to have him home for weeks on end. For those of you who may have grandchildren or children in that age group, they need constant attention. If you leave go of them for 20 minutes, they could be painting the wall or something. So it wasn't so easy, to be honest, trying to balance engaging my community with trying to keep them, to try to keep my 5-year-old. But I have to say a big thank you to my wife, Rebbetzin Sarah, who was literally, when I'm talking about everything I've done, it's been a co-share, if you like, partners with her. She may not necessarily present at every event or interview, but we plan all of it together. We talk together, and we find guests together. And so it's really been a team effort, to be honest. But I'd like to go through a number of strategies. Some of these you may relate to. Some of these you may feel that you've done. Some of them I have implemented and have really helped me. But I think these are really classical ways to look after yourself, right? So even if we get through the pandemic and you go through some other crisis, you go through some other challenges, but we're not at the end of it yet as well. So you can still implement these. I'd like to tell you strategies and then perhaps give you some anecdotes where this has happened through perhaps some stories that have happened over this point of time. The first thing, I think one of the greatest ways to look after your own mental health is through caring for others. Now, that doesn't mean, and don't get me wrong, and please don't get all nervous, caring for others doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your own mental health. If you're not feeling you have the strength or ability to do so, of course, don't feel like you're a bad person. But if you do have it within your capability to care for another person, it's incredible how therapeutic that is for yourself. Even if you can give a phone call to someone else. And we started a number of months ago, we had some young families pairing up with some older members of the community. And I remember hearing from some of them who had volunteered for this program, how rewarding it was for them. We felt so energized when we called this person who was either living by themselves or was in an aged care facility. And I said, that's so crucial. So if you are feeling a bit down, if you are feeling a bit lonely, or perhaps, and again, if it's feeling like more of a depression, of course, seek proper professional help. But if you are feeling in that space, and we could all go through these ups and downs, just think about, how can I do something for somebody else? I've been on the receiving end of that amazingly. So I remember I told you there's been people from all over who've been watching and enjoying. And of course, when you're hosting an event, you don't always get to see everybody because you're busy with the details, as Peter has been over now, very busy, monitoring things. And it was before Rosh Hashanah, and we were getting ready. And of course, a very sad Rosh Hashanah. Normally hundreds of people you get to speak to. Now we were all at home. I remember getting a knock at the door, and of course there was a delivery person, and there was this huge box. And what is this? Oh, it's a delivery for your family. I opened this box, and there was the most beautiful, beautiful gift basket with wine and fruit and all. I'm like, who sent this to me? And inside was a card, and it said there, "Dear Rabbi Rabin, you don't know us necessarily. We've been watching all your Zooms under this name." And I was like, oh, I've seen that name. I had no idea it was, because it wasn't even a surname. It was just a name. And we just want to say thank you for helping us through this pandemic. And, that care to me, to say thank you, literally, I felt like it was almost, when you got your mobile phone and you're watching the battery being drained, and then you plug it in and it's like, oh, you get another boost of juice. I felt like that gift was just like almost, if the batteries was starting to dwindle, it was like a plug-in to see, someone else was caring about me. And to be honest, there's been so many people, and some of them are on this phone, on this Zoom right now, who check in with you and say, Rabbi, how are you doing? How have you been? How are you managing? And just hearing those questions, just hearing that somebody's caring for you, I know it helps them, it helps me. And of course, the other way around, when I care for others, it's very, very therapeutic. Okay, so let's continue. The second most, well, I'm not going to grade them, but I just want to ask Peter, how are we going for time? I just don't want to go too long.
We're going all right. We've got 5 questions. People can ask a few more. So we need to leave some time for that. But
okay. I'll go another 5 minutes and then I'll open up to questions. Is that okay? So the second strategy is, I know this might sound counterintuitive in this instance, because we probably that's all we're doing is taking a break, but take a break. And I mean that seriously. And I don't listen to my own advice at times. And I know some congregants say to me, Rabbi, you got to take a break. I said, I'll take a break. There's nowhere to go. Where can I go? But it might even be taking a break, not necessarily in a location, just taking a break, switching off. And I have to say that I know this is going to sound rather, I'm not encouraging that we should never go back to shul again, but I have to say that there were times in parts of the lockdown where there was no shul services. The Shabbat, the shul was closed. And then when Shabbos came in, I switched off my mobile phone. I didn't have to go on Zoom, and it was literally just me and my family. And I have to say that it was almost like an oasis in time, because on Shabbos, I'm usually so busy when it's my regular activities. I'm Friday night at the shul and entertaining people at our homes. And then Shabbos day, there's, big crowds and a kiddush and probably a wedding call up and a bar mitzvah. And then Shabbos is busy. And it was just this tranquility. And then we would go for a walk in the park and we'd see some members of our community, and it'd be so nice. And that's taking a break. It means, stop doing what you're finding pressurizing when you're finding is work. Take a break. So number 1 is caring for others. Number 2 is taking a break. The third thing, which I think people underestimate how important it is making sure you eat well. And again, I don't always listen to my advice. I need to eat a bit healthier. But I think, when we're at home all the time, we get bored and we open the fridge as many times as we want, and there's nothing else to do. So we start eating. So one thing that I took on myself, which is probably about a month or 2 into the lockdown, I took on this intermittent fasting. I don't know if anyone has tried that or does that. So from 8 p.m. at night, I don't eat till 12 o'clock the next day. And good. So it helps me. The truth is, you have to do exercise plus eat healthily to allow that to lose weight, but it actually helps you maintain your weight. So at least you're not putting on weight through this pandemic. So that was also very important. But again, the experts will tell you that you can't just do that alone. You actually have to eat healthier foods. I'll keep going because of time. I think another important thing, and again, it's not always easy to find someone to talk to, so you might need to call a professional, you might need to speak to someone who's trained like this, but talk about your feelings. And what I've loved about these talks that we've hosted is to hear people talk about their feelings. A lot of the talks are people are giving you a window into their souls, into their lives. And of course, you know, making so many phone calls through this time, just to hear people just want to say what they're feeling, you know, and don't be scared to say what you're feeling. I know we become so accustomed in the modern world that somebody says, how are you? And you say, good, fine, and you. And when someone doesn't respond in that way, and it's been interesting because more than any other time as a rabbi, I found when I've said to people, how are you? People are not responding, oh, fine, thanks, and you, or I'm doing all right. People have been saying, I'm not doing great, actually, Rabbi. And it's like, it's quite startling and it's quite confronting. But it allows when you say, well, tell me what's going on. And of course, well, they say, well, what do you think is going on? We're in the middle of a pandemic. And then you break it down. You say, well, no, but tell me how are you feeling about it? And then people get a chance to talk about it. And I've had people messaging me after these phone calls and saying, thank you for allowing me to express how I'm feeling. And there could be a lot of trigger points. You know, there's so much information coming our way. We're all on a lot of talks. We're all on a lot of Zooms. We're seeing social media. And you might hear something or be exposed to something that triggers you, that makes you angry. Talk about it, express it. Another very important one is that leads to asking for help. Don't be scared to ask for help. And I've stressed it so many times to my community, at least. I don't think they listen. I don't think everybody listens because at times I feel like there were people who wanted help that they didn't ask. People are perhaps proud, perhaps feel ashamed to ask for help. But it's so important when you're going through a crisis, you're going through a difficult time. If you need help, ask for it. There's so many people out there who want to help. You know, I received a lot of phone calls in the beginning. Hi, Rabbi. Yes, we're doing well. How can we help someone else? We want to help. We want to do this. We want to assist. And I had this whole list of people who wanted to assist, but no list of people who needed help. It took time to get the message across that don't be scared to ask for help. And slowly but surely, more and more people felt more comfortable to ask for help. So we've got to care for others. We've got to take a break. We've got to eat well. And of course, you've got to also accept that what is happening in your life and what you're able to manage is also okay. I think a lot of people, especially when you look at social media, you know, you see people taking on new hobbies. You see people learning languages through pandemics. You see people doing all sorts of things, running marathons and doing all sorts of fantastic things. And you sit back and you say, I can't do any of this. I must be useless. I might accept who you are. I used to tell, especially young families, just getting out of the bed in the morning and just, you know, letting your kids survive the day, that's good enough. You know, you see all these, I remember there was all these sort of activities, advice to do with your children at home, you know, paint these pictures or do it. And then you look at your own reality and it's like your child's just literally on the phone and running around crazy. You think, how are these other, and I say, look, don't believe everything you see on social media. You know, these are all perhaps adverts or people, you know, trying to make things seem so perfect. Accept who you are. Who you are is also perfect. Who you are is also okay. You don't have to be Superman or woman, right? We're all human beings, and what you can accomplish, you can accomplish. And of course, the final thing, which I've been saying through the talk, is keeping in touch. Human beings crave connection, right? We crave connection in some way. And I think it's been so hard. I think perhaps that's been the greatest challenge. I know for me as a rabbi, I love interacting with people. Zoom is great, but it's not the same. You can't replicate that human connection, that human discussion, having people around your table, visiting people, going for a walk. Now, of course, we've been able to have small parts of that, but it's staying connected. And I think if you can keep in touch, whether it be with a shul, with an organization, and of course, B'nai B'rith, I'm sure your group here has kept you connected in some way. We're all involved in different areas. Make sure you keep up that connection. And I think just an overall reflection is each and every one of us has gone through something which perhaps none of us have ever experienced in our lives. I mean, I know some people have recollections of their parents in the Holocaust, and of course we cannot ever compare what we're going through to that. And we had one of the most moving talks that I hosted was a Holocaust survivor in South Africa, Ella Blumenthal, and she was, it literally changed my whole perspective. And of course, we've all learned about the Holocaust, read about it, but just hearing her testimony and hearing the experience that she went through. But that being said, it shouldn't undermine what we go through. We're not living in that generation. And of course, we can still struggle. But again, summing it all up, I think if you just recognize that we've been through something difficult, it's still continuing. And of course, hopefully it will open up and we can resume somewhat of normality. and just be proud of yourself. Be proud that you've survived, you've gotten through it, you've stayed connected, and just be proud of that. And of course, just find those connections, continue to find those connections, continue to see if you can care for others and all those other things that I spoke about. And from my perspective, we will continue at our shul and in my role to try and inspire others. And as I said, probably the thing that's kept me going is that first one. When I can provide, when I can give things to others, it certainly helps me continue with my work. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a perspective as to how I've enjoyed the last number of months, some techniques, and of course, very happy to take some questions now as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Rabbi. I might, I've taken you off spotlight so that you can see everybody who's here. Or most people, there are a few people who haven't got their videos on, but you'll be able to see some familiar faces and some other faces, of course. I have received several questions, and I thought I might just go through those. The first one from Brian Luber, you've sort of partly covered, but I wonder if you can focus it a bit more on what you as a rabbi specifically do to assist individual members of your congregation.
Fantastic question. Thank you, Brian. So look, it ranges on a whole variety of things. I mean, the pastoral work, of course, still continued and still continues through the pandemic. Of course, if people were bereaved during this time, you still got to visit them in some way. You still got to do the funerals. Of course, weddings changed. I fit in a few weddings through this time. But on a regular basis, you're spending a lot of time on the phone, just talking to people. Literally, that's probably the big thing. And then there's, before each Chag, we had to provide resources. We made a beautiful Rosh Hashanah box that had a guide. I worked on.
Is this your question here? Can you tell?
Sorry?
Sorry, just keep yourself on mute.
So, there's that aspect of, giving classes, keeping up with shiurim, finding the guest speakers, weekly email communication. So your whole day is involved with communicating, speaking, talking, taking phone calls. And then, of course, if you do have people, and there's been a number through the last number of months who are going through actual financial issues, we don't necessarily, we're not a charity in that sense, but we have a chesed project, which we have some resources that we help. We put them in connection. We connect them with others in that space, whether it be, Sea Care or Jewish Care or other organizations that can help, on a more ongoing basis. But we provide very basic support in terms of that kind of stuff, whether it be meals or vouchers. So it's a whole range of activity that goes on a daily basis.
Thank you very much.
Okay. The next one's a very cheeky question. I have no idea who asked this. I won't give any names away. But some synagogues have charged the full fee for the time of the pandemic, and some others haven't. I imagine that some of the outgoings would be reduced. What do you think about fees during a time when the place is closed?
So it's an excellent question. I think a few things on that level, on that regard. Shuls, yes, there may have been sort of less expenses in terms of not paying for kiddushim and all that. But remember, there's also a lot of intake which also is stopped. The weekly donations at the bima, the weekly kiddushim or bar mitzvahs or simchas that are occurring. But I think it really depends on what the shul's been doing through this time. There's always going to be someone who feels, I don't have my seat for Rosh Hashanah, I don't want to pay. But I think shuls which have demonstrated that we're not just about a one-day-a-year operation, and we're not just about you coming in, but it's a membership. You're a member of this community. We're providing things for you. We're there for you if you need us. And, of course, salaries still need to be paid. Then I think the shul can justify still charging. I know a lot of shuls have made different, our shul, for example, has given different payment plans and extending the year to 15 months, or, to try and be consistent. Of course, not turning anyone away who wants to remain connected but cannot afford it. But I think shuls perhaps, and I'm not naming any shul, I don't know any shul that might fit into this, but let's say there's a shul which sort of went dormant over this time and said, look, we're not open, so we're not providing anything, and maybe did one thing every now and again. Then you might have a community member saying, well, you haven't responded to us, you haven't provided for us, so I don't want to continue providing for you. So I think the onus is on the shul to recognize that you can still connect in so many ways. You can still be very proactive, and you can still, cater to your membership, even through these times with the shul being closed. I mean, as I said, I feel like we've probably done much more than we usually do, than we've ever done at this time. So, yes, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of people do share your question. So, excellent one.
All right. The next question is about how you think that things might change after the pandemic, whether the way you interact with your congregation might be different. In other words, might you use Zoom for some things, or what will change after the pandemic?
I think that's another great question. And I think the answer to this question is, in my view, things will certainly change in many respects. From the very basic respect of, there's been a whole range of things that people who don't usually come to the shul or aren't able to come to events who are now connecting. And I'm talking about even paid members who are not usually able to come to everything, have now much more ease of participating from the comfort of their homes through Zoom. So I think what's going to happen is, I think there's going to be a lot of things which we're going to have to start thinking about. Do we want this to be a Zoom event, or do we want this to be an in-person event? And that's going to be, I think, for almost every event, you're going to start questioning that. I think getting guest speakers, there's really no need necessarily at times to get everyone out at night in the cold to come to a hall to sit down in a chair where you can sit so comfortably in your couch, and you can be warm, and you can just turn your computer on and off. You don't have to drive. But of course, there's going to be things, and I think something which is so beautiful is, I know that, of course, every congregation and every denomination of Judaism does things differently, but at least from an Orthodox perspective, I find what is so pristine and so beautiful that even though we were streaming things before Shabbat and after Shabbat, there's still something so unique that not even Zoom can sort of penetrate, and that is coming to shul and being with other human beings, davening together in a congregation. I'm so glad that cannot be replaced. But everything else, I think, is up for up for discussion. I think when it comes to children and activities like that, I've run a number of events for children, and it's not the same. Having children participate in we had for example, the other day we had a reptile show. All the kids on their Zooms, and seeing them all gathering in the center and running around and playing, and that cannot be replaced. So I think, yes, what will change is each provider of shul services and activities is going to sort of, I guess, ascertain each event one by one and say, I think this will be more beneficial on Zoom, and this will be more beneficial in person. But there will be a premium. There will be a premium on connection, I think. Something which we're all going to want is going to be connecting with us, with each other in person. So that's also going to, the level of prestige when it comes to connecting in person is going to go up.
Okay, another question is about this person finding it difficult to understand the thinking of the Haredi community with it not taking proper protection against COVID, avoiding the restrictions, whether in Australia, New York, Israel. Why is this not a good look apart from a highly dangerous activity to everyone? What's your attitude to what some of the Haredi are doing?
So I think a few things. I mean, as I said, I sit on the executive of the Rabbinical Council, and from day one, we've been proactive in expressing, number one, from a varying levels, from the very basic health precaution, that this was and is a deadly virus. It does sort of challenge our most vulnerable in the community. And so we were very proactive, and as I said, shutting down the shuls before we were even mandated to. And I think listening to government rules is something which it's sadly, although we don't always like them, and I think they're becoming a bit more strained over time and people are getting a bit more fed up. But bottom line is, the minute we lose respect for our government rules and we don't take them seriously, then we can collapse as a society, to be honest. And we know the Jewish principle of Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law, and we've got to respect it. And in particular, when the laws are there to protect our health, so much more so. And so we've been very vocal and also criticizing, to be honest, some of the community, some of the Haredi communities who have decided that they want to serve God. And so, we couldn't care less about anybody else. It's very short-sighted. It's very dangerous because, the last thing we need is any more reason for anti-Semitism and to spark and to create hatred against the Jewish community. And things like this do create that. And so I think every reasonable leader needs to take a hard look at themselves, those who have encouraged their communities to ignore the rules, to really decide whether they're in the right business, because I can't see how someone can continue being a faith leader if they're not respecting the rules and they're not encouraging their communities to respect the rules. And sadly, at the same time, and I will say at the same time, there are people who just are craving for a story and will take things out of perspective and take things out of context, and maybe take a video. No, I saw something on social media the other day. There was in Borough Park, or I can't remember, maybe in Flatbush, there was a guy walking around taking a video and trying to find Haredim without masks. And so there was somebody filming him, filming them. And he was saying, look, he only points the camera at the one Haredi Jew who's not wearing a mask when there's like 100 have walked past with their masks, and he sees one not, then he films, and then he makes a whole documentary of, look, the Haredim are not wearing masks. So you also got to be careful at times to believe what you're seeing. And that's not always the truth. But yes, there certainly were people who were flouting and who were not respecting the rules. And I think it just puts us all in a very horrible predicament. So speak out when you can. At the same time, also make sure you do a bit of diligence before you just criticize and cause, start shouting at others as well.
Another question is, do you think that during this COVID pandemic, the shul has actually had an opportunity to reach out and attract new members?
Yes, absolutely. Interestingly, we have had a number of new members sign up, even in the pandemic, which I think is just mind-boggling because we don't have anything going on in terms of actual practical shul services. But as I said, I think people have recognized through this that it's not just about the shul services. It's about a whole package. It's about connecting to a community. It's about having, in our case, myself and Rebbetzin Sarah, but every shul with their own, spiritual leaders. It's that ability to feel that the community is there for you and you there for the community. And I think people do value that, and it's become, it's something which people long and want. And there are other clubs that people can belong to, which I think also gives them that. But for some who don't belong to anything, a shul could very much be that point of connection. And I think, paying your little fee or big fee at some perhaps is guaranteeing you that connection, and that somebody will reach out to you if you need help.
Mm-hmm. A question someone has asked about with the new rules coming in on the 1st of November about gatherings of 10 people being allowed outside. At the general meeting just before you came on, we were talking about whether we could have a meeting in the park where we have 10 people in one corner and 10 people in another. I wonder if your shul has considered having outdoor meetings and maybe having bubbles of 10, as it were.
Right. So my understanding is that you'll be allowed to have 20 outdoors for a shul from the 1st of November, plus a faith leader. So we will most certainly have our outdoor minyanim. I also sit on what's called the Multicultural Affairs Group, which reports to government, and I'm one of the representatives of the Jewish community. And I don't want to get political, but there's been a lot of upset amongst faith leaders, and I'm not talking about within the Jewish faith, I'm talking about the other faith groups, because there's a little bit of inconsistency and a little bit of confusion. For example, from that date, as an example, you'll be able to have 40 people in a pub, but you won't be able to have even 10 people in a shul. And I think a lot of faith leaders are upset about it and saying, how is that being calculated? If you come, we were open for about 6 weeks, after the first lockdown, before we went into the second wave, shuls were allowed to reopen. We had about 5 or 6 weeks, but we reopened. And I don't know if you can see, I'll try and point you. Probably can still see some of the orange stickers that are there. I don't know if it's coming up, but there was orange stickers, and we had, 10 people all over the shul in each corner, and, with masks on, and we were literally maybe 4 or 5 meters away from each other. And, people are saying that, how can they say that that's any more dangerous than a pub, where you're all eating together, you're drinking, you're schmoozing. And so, yes, we are going to respect the rules. So it is what it is, but we do put in challenges to the government through these faith groups, and we say, explain to us, come and view how our synagogue runs. But to answer your question in short, yeah, we will most certainly. My philosophy has been, and my board has been very supportive and encouraging. What we can do, we do. We as soon as we can do something, we're on it. Of course, with all the safety procedures and the sanitizers and the masks and the spacing, and But yes, people want to come back and pray. People find it very challenging not to be able to come. For those who are used to coming to a daily minyan, and of course to provide the service for Kaddish for people who got yortzites or who have unfortunately been bereaved and they want to come and say Kaddish. So yes, absolutely, we'll continue with that.
Okay, look, that's the end of the questions that have been written in chat, but I might open up now, and if people just want to make a statement or ask another question, I invite you to do so. It's a bit trickier because there are about 3 screens worth of people and it's not possible to see everybody who's waving. I can see that Annette Gladwin is waving. Perhaps she could ask the first question if you're waving. Annette, did you want to ask something?
Yeah. I would like to discuss the article by Peter Conn in this week's Jewish News, Clash on Street After Shul Gathering.
Yep.
On 3AW, Neil Mitchell talked about it. The Channel 9 News had this balagan of a dust people rushing out and the neighbours complaining and telling them off and filming them or whatever.
Yes.
Then Peter in the Jewish News talks about the Department of Health and Human Services meeting with the Rabbinical Council of Victoria to talk about changes re-outdoor services. Apparently, Yavna, the shul in Yavna had outdoor services. Can you talk about whether your shul had small outdoor services? You could have 2 services at Mizrahi, although physically separate, and halakhically could be counted as a minyan of 10. Did you have it at your shul? Mizrahi said, well, you know, we set the trend, as Danny Lamb would. And other shuls, we're a model for other shuls to do the same thing. Did you have outdoor services?
Yes, so I'll give you a bit of background so you understand that article. The conversations that I spoke to you about as the executive, we have been meeting weekly with the senior members of the Department of Health, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and ministers ministers of multiculturalism, some local ministers. You know, we had, of course, David Southwick and Josh Burns and others who joined these meetings. And at one of the meetings, after the last set of explanations, when they allowed you to have 5 people plus 1 faith leader outdoors, the Department of Health and Human Services explained to us that that means that you can have 5 and 1 for each place of worship. And they said that a definition of a place of worship could be, let's say, for example, Mizrahi, which has 5 different shuls within their campus. Each of those shuls can have 5 and 1. And so what Mizrahi did was that they created, you know, 5 and 1s, 5 and 1s, 5 and 1s, 5 and 1s, all distant from each other, but halachically that they could be, because they could see each other, they could continue, they could count to the same minyan. And that was signed off by the Department of Health and Human Services. And so a number of shuls, including mine, you know, spoke to lawyers and spoke to counsel from the Department of Health and Human Services to establish whether we qualify to have more than 1 group of 5 and 1. And so we combined, and we have outside, we have a 5 and 1 and a 5 and 1, and that makes a magical minyan. And so, yes, that's what it was about. Now, could some people be prone to abuse that loophole or that definition? Yes, they might say, well, I've got 10 classrooms in my building, so I'm going to consider each classroom a 5 and 1. Now, I think that's stretching it a bit. And perhaps what Adas was saying is that they followed that same rule, but when it got caught on camera and when people blew it up, they may have in fact not transgressed or gone against the actual rules of the health department, but it didn't look good. And so you also have to take into account perception. You know, so even if you're doing everything 100% correctly, perception is also very, very crucial, because you don't want to create ill feeling. And you know, when we do anything here, I inform our neighbors in the community around the shul, because you want them to understand what's going on. You don't want them to come to conclusions. And that's been very helpful. So I think that the Adas community actually did send a letter or did a mail drop to all the neighbors, but it's unfortunately backfired and it looked very bad. And yes, so that's the background to that article by Peter Conn, if that gives you an explanation.
Yes, can I just finish? My neighbour who's Catholic said, how come these Jews can go into their synagogues and have services when they're very strong Catholics. We're not allowed in our churches. And you have church leaders, Anglicans, Protestants, Catholics saying, well, why can't we do the same?
Yeah, so
this is what breeds
no one's been allowed inside the shul. This has all been outdoors. And we made it very clear to the department when we started our discussions with them months ago that we don't want a Jewish exemption. We don't want a Jewish exception. And so nothing that we've done, and we're talking about the Rabbinical Council and the advice we've given to our members, was to say all we've done is we've sought from them what do the rules in fact mean and applied them based on their interpretation. So the Catholic Church and the mosques could all do the exact same thing. They could have numerous groups of 5 in one if they have numerous places of worship on their one campus. So, they just didn't have that discussion the same way we did. Sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Can you, this you publicised in the media. For most people who read Peter Con's article, they said, well, we didn't know. We thought that these Adusniks were making trouble and having too many people. And that's how our perception was. Yeah. And the media too. It wasn't explained that you met with the...
I think you're right. I think we did get some feedback. We did get some feedback that there should have been a statement explaining that. What we did encourage, the Victoria Police actually came out with a statement. I just don't think Neil Mitchell, wanted to show that side. But the police actually released a statement, the Caulfield Police, saying that the Adas were not found to be in breach of any of the laws. And they've put it in writing. So I hope the Jewish News runs that part of the story too.
Okay, look, thanks for that, Annette. I think Miriam might have a question.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask where God is in this pandemic.
Very good question, Miriam. You've asked the right person, but I don't think I'll have the right answer. Look, I mean, where is God in this pandemic? I think, for each of us, we can probably answer that in a different way. I mean, I've seen God in numerous ways, through the kindness that people have done for each other. I've seen God in sparing people. Some people have been very sick who've been healed, and even people who've gone through loss, to see the outpouring of love that they've shared with each other, to be able to find space in my prayers. I think I found God more than I've perhaps at times found even in the synagogue, your opportunity to talk. But yes, there's always going to feel this sense of abandonment at times when we, as I said, when we feel that sense of loss, that we don't have what we usually have. But I think, God is almost like that concept of, that when you take the camera and you zoom out and you can see more perspective. I think we live our lives in a very small box. As you can see, we're all defined by the little boxes that Zoom has created for us. But ultimately, when you can look at the bigger picture, you start to see things and understand things that perhaps you can't see from our bird's eye view. And I think that in a way is the analogy that I always understand, that from my limited perspective, it's at times difficult to see God, but that's because I'm zoomed in. I'm only seeing what my eyes can see. And there are times when you get the benefit of seeing the bigger picture. And there are times where you live your whole life where you don't see the benefit of the bigger picture. And that's where it comes to faith and trust. And we believe there's something greater than us. And I always look at children as the great example. A child can get angry with you, or a child can feel very comfortable that you're around, but the child doesn't necessarily understand everything. So if I don't give my child a lolly, he starts shouting at me. But I see the bigger picture. I say the lolly's not good for you. You're going to have rotten teeth and you're going to need more dentists. And in his worldview, it's like all he's seeing is, I want to eat the lolly. But I can see the bigger picture. And I think at times that's where I think God is. God is, you've got to zoom out for it at times and say, maybe there's something bigger. But I certainly empathize. And at times, as I said, I struggle just like every one of you. And it's not easy. So thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions at all? Just unmute yourself if I don't see you waving. Any final question?
Okay. I can make a statement.
Okay. Go ahead, Rita.
Well, the South African community brought Friday night services as a big deal to the Shul Northeastern, as they're doing now at South Caulfield. But I must say, if it wasn't for Shabbat and knowing the rabbi was going to have his beautiful, with Greg, sing and invite people for Shabbat, it could be any day of the week now with me with this COVID, but this makes a definite day that I'm looking forward to something. I get busy with other things. I send off good Shabbos to people. I say, oh, it's that day already. And people are aware of it, because otherwise every day just rolls into the next. And this has made it the most beautiful thing. I can't tell you. And I'm not overly religious, but I just love it. That's my statement.
I appreciate that, Rita. But also, interestingly, you just reminded me of something. So even when the shul's being closed, we've done a daily Ma'ariv, an evening service on Zoom. So although it's not a proper minyan, but at 7:30 every night, when we used to have our regular minyan in the shul, we've continued that for the last 6 months. And for me personally, it's almost been like a grounding. It's like the day could just feel totally lost and disconnected. But 7:30 comes and you click on your Zoom and we dive in together on Zoom. And I find that, and it doesn't have to necessarily be Ma'ariv, it could be anything for anyone else. But for me, and as you said, for you in the weekday connection, it's almost like that you look forward to something at some consistency. Consistency is so important. You hear a lot of these people who've gone through real struggles. We're having actually on the 3rd of November, I think we're having this guy, Uri Ehrenfeld, who was in the prisoner of war camp in Egypt. He was taken captive during the Yom Kippur War, and he's going to give a Zoom talk for us. And I just read some of the things that he wrote, and it was about finding something consistent every day, even though he was locked up in a small little dungeon cell. And I think, it's not comparable necessarily, but every day having that Zoom Ma'ariv was almost like I had to put my jacket on, I had to put my shirt on, get changed, and be on Zoom. It was quite powerful to help through the pandemic for me personally.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi. Good evening.
It's Jaime.
Hello, Jaime.
Hi. The question was, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, everybody who didn't go to synagogue finished up listening to the Reform service on Zoom. Why did the Orthodox congregation just allow this to happen without even trying to do something about catering for the Orthodox community?
It's an excellent question. So I think two things. I don't think everybody went onto the Reform. I think a lot of people, still respect the Orthodox values and halakha. But yes, I think a lot of people may have been, encouraged or felt the need to connect with something. I know me and a number of my colleagues, we worked very hard to give people a taste of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur before and after. And I think, we had, before our Yom Kippur, for our Kol Nidre, we had, over 150 people who came on Zoom, and that means probably 300 people because they had their families with them. And they felt that very rewarding. Look, halakha will do its best to try and accommodate people, but at the same time, it has to stay true to itself in terms of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And I don't mean to be condescending and not judgmental in any form or shape. So for those of you who did watch it, we all got to do what we've got to do. But in terms of two things from my perspective, one is, as I said, I find that the fact that we can't use Zoom for Shabbos or Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur keeps it very, very special and very, very unique. At the same time, if we can use it, we will use it. But at the same time, the question is, who are we serving? Are we serving ourselves or are we serving Hashem? Now, if we believe that this is not the mechanism that we can use to serve Hashem, and that we need to serve Hashem, through the mechanisms of how halakha has evolved, which doesn't allow for Zoom and these things, then I think that's also encouraging, and we should be happy to serve Hashem without the Zoom. But again, if people felt that was, beneficial and it helped them feel connected, I'm not going to sit in judgment. And gesundheit hate if you did that and it was helpful, it was meaningful to you. God bless you. Hashem should bless you for wanting to connect with Him at that time. So kol hakavod for those who did, and kol hakavod to those who didn't as well.
Can I just say something?
Okay, Rosa.
Yeah. Just in defence of that, Peter and I are members of Caulfield Shul.
Yes.
And I must say, during this entire lockdown, they have been so supportive in many, many ways. We're out of the walking distance to get to the shul, but over the Yom Tovim, they had videos, and I'm sure you did, before and after. They had a Yiska service. Yes. And they sent a box for Rosh Hashanah, and I felt more connected than I do usually. And as an Orthodox, non-practicing Orthodox Jew, I would have been uncomfortable watching the service on the Yom Tov. And I think what they did was wonderful. It was really good.
I agree.
I'm not saying that those who belong to the Reform or anything else, that's fine, you know.
I agree with you 100%. And as I said, I think everyone had to do what they felt comfortable for themselves. But I'll just tell you a very small anecdote. You know, it came to Simchat Torah. We had, you were allowed to have obviously groups of 5 and 1. So we had, through the day, we had, you know, individual families coming for 10 minutes to come with their children. And there was a small Sefer Torah that we gave. Obviously, they sanitized and washed and all the things. And I received a number of messages after Yom Tov saying, in one family in particular, they said this was the best Simchat Torah they've ever experienced. And I thought to myself, how could this be the best Simchat Torah you've ever experienced? But for them, it was so special. It was husband and wife and their 3 children dancing around a chair just by themselves, holding a real Torah. And it was just so moving and personal that I agree with you, Rosa, that in a way that, of course, we want to get back to shul where we can hear the beautiful chazan in person and can hear the rabbi speaking, but having that sort of that personal connection and, you know, having something for yourself. We also did a beautiful box. The book that you got in your box, I was one of the authors of that book. So it was, I think people really enjoyed that book, to be honest. I've got a lot of feedback about it. So well said, Rosa.
All right. Look, I usually let Rosa have the last word, so I think we might actually finish on that point. So thank you very much, Rabbi Rabin, for that presentation. We did have one earlier in the pandemic, which was run by a psychologist from Gesher Rabin unit and from Akiba unit. And I must say that was a slightly different perspective with 2 psychologists presenting, but by you presenting it from the rabbinical point of view, I guess, I think that has complemented the other presentation very well. And I think overall we've been very well served by having these kind of 2 perspectives on how better to deal with the COVID pandemic. I was very pleased with the number of people attending tonight. I must confess I got a bit nervous because B'nai B'rith accidentally had a second function on this evening, and I thought that would affect us very adversely, but the attendance has been very good, which I think has been a tribute to your drawing power, Rabbi Rabin. So, and everything that we expected has been fulfilled. You've been a very eloquent speaker, and I thank you very much for it. I want to just for a brief moment share the screen and show you what we wish to present to you. As usual for our invited speakers, we like to present a token of our esteem, which is a certificate from the B'nai B'rith Israel Commission, where we make a donation in your name to usually to the Beresova charity or kitchen in Israel. But there are other projects, obviously, that the Israel Commission supports, and we are very happy to provide a donation to them in your name. And we will be sending you that certificate. You can, I don't know whether you want to put it on your wall or not, but anyway, we'll be sending that to you in due course. So thank you very much for coming along this evening, giving up your time and sharing your ideas and your insight with us. So if I invite everybody to unmute themselves, and you can show your thanks for our guest speaker tonight, Rabbi Daniel Rabin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. It was wonderful to see all of you and to see a number of familiar faces, and wonderful to be with all of you. And please God, we get out of this. Slow steps, but the right steps.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting so you can go and have your supper. And